It's time for the Property Podcast, where every week tens of thousands of property investors, new and experienced, join together to get news, knowledge and laughs at our expense. With me, Rob Bence.
And me, Rob Dix. Join us every Thursday morning for your weekly dose of property ideas and motivation. Then head over to our website at thepropertypodcast.com to keep the conversation going. Now though, let's get started.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Property Podcast. It is episode 114, the live episode. No pressure, Rob, no bloopers please, because we have an audience.
We do, and let's get a big whoop from our live studio audience. Okay, so either editor Chris has put in a sound effect there, or you heard silence. And if you hear silence, it's because it's not a live studio audience. We're doing this on a webinar, so we are going to have people typing into us. So you won't even hear any clattering of keys because they're not in the room with us. But we'll be taking live questions from our audience while we do this, which means, Rob, we cannot screw up. We can't swear. We can't re-record the same bit 1,000 times. But you got through the intro, and so that's half the battle won.
Yeah, because as I said before we went live, that's the bit I mess up the most. That and reading out the reviews. So I've done the first bit. Let's see how I get on with the review later. And thank God it's a short one. The show notes for this episode are thepropertyhub.net/live questions. So if you want to go back and review some of the questions that we've been asked and you want to see them again, and for any other things we link to in today's episode, go to thepropertyhub.net/live questions. But Rob, before we get into the excitement of the Q&A, we have to point out that it's just been an epic week for us because we finally got our hands on the physical copy of the magazine, and it smells good. It's a great read, but all that fresh paper and fresh ink.
Well, I haven't got to smell it yet because I haven't got my copy out here in the States, but I've seen the photos. It looks fantastic. Really, really pleased with how it's all come together. So it should, by now, by the time this goes out, have landed on your doormat. And please let us know what you think of it. Hope you enjoy it as much as we do. And we're already well underway with issue 2, which is going to be coming in August. And some of the credit for the magazine, well, most of it needs to go to our team, who've been fantastic. A tiny little bit to us, maybe, but also a hefty dollop of credit to a team of people who helped us give us feedback along the way. So we had a little focus group on the go with people giving us ideas and suggestions as the magazine came along. And those are the people who are joining us on the Q&A today. Also, some people joining us who helped us out doing the same thing for our book launch. So our two massive projects that we had this year, which felt so daunting at the start of the year, we've now achieved both of them, and it's with thanks to all the people who are joining us on the podcast today.
So this is just a very, very small token of our appreciation, and we want to make fools of ourselves live to you this evening. So thank you for joining us, and if you're listening to recording, thank you for the support as well. You know, hundreds and hundreds of people have signed up for the magazine, and the book is wow. I mean, that's just selling like hotcakes. It's unbelievable still. Unbelievable amount of numbers selling every single day, even, never mind week. So thank you to everyone who's been supporting us. So this is a bit of a thank you back to all of you. But let's get going, Rob. Let's get into our topic of the week. Let's get into the questions. And do you want to go first?
I will. Okay, so I'll take the first question. I've actually got two questions here that I've seen, both of which are linked. So I'll tackle both of them at the same time. So the first question comes in from Sarah. And Sarah says, we have enough deposit to purchase either one property for $700,000 or two properties for $350,000 each. There are pros and cons to both, but interested to know what you would go for. We're looking for long-term capital growth. And this links into another question, which comes in from Jane. And Jane says, does your first investment have the most risk because of a lower resilience to shocks and voids? And the reason that these two are linked is that I would be going to use that money to buy two properties for exactly the reason that Jane talks about. When you have one property, if something goes wrong with it, then that's 100% of your income at stake. If you've got two, then obviously it's 50%. The flip side to that is obviously that there are costs involved with buying any property. So all your legal fees and arranging the finance and everything will be doubled if you buy two. But I'd still be looking to do it because I think the benefits definitely outweigh it. You could also be looking to diversify potentially. So I was speaking to someone the other day who's just bought 2 flats within the same block as his first 2 properties. That's a completely fine thing to do. But there'll be other people who will look at different types of property or different parts of the country. And that's a theme that I think we might be coming back to on the podcast shortly. So that is my answer. Rob, anything to add?
No, I think, as you said, you've alluded to that. We are going to cover this in more detail in a future podcast episode. In fact, I may as well give it away. We're going to talk about it next week. More on that at the end of the show. But I'm not going to say much more, Rob, because I think you've covered it well, but we can actually dedicate a whole episode to it next week. So great questions. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Jane. Next up, question in from Ed. And he says, if you had £50,000 cash to invest, but you didn't have the option of a mortgage, would you get started with a cheaper property or save up more? Interesting question, Ed. I suppose it depends on the rate you can save. Because if you can, within 3 months, add another 10 grand, then you may want to wait a bit. But if that's not feasible and it'd take maybe 6 to 12 months to get another 10k, then actually I'd probably get on with it and start going. So it does depend on what rate you can save. If you can significantly add to that pot in a very short space of time, then maybe just wait for a few months. But if that's realistically the amount you're going to have and you're not going to be able to add to it too much, yeah, I'd say get going. You're kind of close to that number where you're in a sort of demographic, a property profile that starts to get risky around 50,000, especially if you're not buying below market value. If that's a below market value price, then you're probably okay. So if it's worth 70 and you get it for around 50, then great. But if it's a property that is actually worth 50, then chances are it's not going to be in the best area. It depends where you're looking, but chances are it's not going to be in the best area. And if that's the case, then you're going to have capital growth issues potentially and tenant issues. Not a guarantee that those downsides will happen, but more likely. So it really depends. If you can save up and get to sort of 70 purchase price level, then you should be fine. If the property's worth 70 and you're getting it for 50 because you've bought below market value, then yeah, crack on. And if you can save a significant amount of money in a short space of time, then maybe wait a little bit longer too. So I know there's no clear answer there. I do apologise because it just depends. There's so many variables. Rob, what would you do?
I agree with everything you said, but I'd also dig into the point of no option of getting a mortgage. So perhaps you've looked into that in some detail, and if you have, then fair enough, you know what your options are. But if you haven't sort of turned over every stone, then it's worth doing that, because there are often, I think a mortgage availability is better than it's often perceived to be. Even if you're not in the ideal situation, you'll find that you don't have the full range of products. You'll find that the rates won't be as good, but under lots of circumstances where you think it might not be possible, it is. So if you haven't spoken to a broker yet, I'd definitely do that to make sure that you don't have the option of getting a mortgage. But if that is indeed the case, then Rob, I'm with you on that. So Ed had a follow-up question as well. And he says, what is the number one mistake that you would urge investors to avoid? Yeah, we were talking about this beforehand. I know that you've got an answer, Rob, but I'll come in with a different one first, which is I'd say the number one mistake is overpaying. And I think that that's something that's quite easy to do, that a lot of people probably do when they're starting out because of excitement, perhaps, and also not being sure of how to work out how much the price should be, and all manner of other factors. So if you're buying at auction, it's really easy to get carried away and just let it bid up and up and up. If you're buying it from an estate agent, they might have put a crazy asking price on it. You get a couple of thousand off the asking price and think you've done really well. But in fact, it was way overpriced to start with. And I think that that's something which is well worth avoiding, because Rob's talked about buying below market value. But if you end up buying above market value, then it means, of course, you're putting more of your own money into there. That's going to affect your ROI. And also, you're going to, hopefully, the value of the property is going to go up over time. You're going to be able to refinance and expand. But if you overpay, then the market has to go up just to get you back to where you should have been to start with. So that's what I'd say, Rob. But I think you've got a different answer.
Yeah, and I think that it was quite interesting because we both gave two separate answers before this. And I was like, yeah, completely agree with what you just said. And James has come in with this comment now through the questions as well, live. And it's all about goals for me. Investors that don't set goals, they just fall into property investment. They start buying a couple of properties and they don't know why. They haven't got a clear vision of where this is taking them. And I think that's a really, really common mistake, and actually a significant one too, because if you do not set goals, then you don't know if you're being successful or not. You've got no bar to measure yourself against. So setting goals is a massive one. And then following on from that, really linked into it, is then the strategy. Having that strategy to then get you to those goals. So many investors start and then end up wondering what to do next. It's really amazing that RMP, it tends to be 2 client profiles. There are some differences, but it's normally people who haven't done anything and they want to know how to start, or people who've done a couple and kind of don't know where to go next. And it's that couple don't know where to go next. They're the people who haven't really defined their goals, and that's why they've come unstuck. So goals for me, and then following that up with a strategy. And that's interesting because the next question's from Peter, and he very much has a goal and talking about strategy as well. So that's great. And Peter says he has a 10-year plan and he wants to achieve a passive income of 5k it says per annum, but I'm guessing per month. And should he focus on capital growth and BMV, or focus on yield? So a high yield portfolio. Now, Peter, what I would say is actually, because of your timeframes involved, I don't know your starting point, because of your timeframes involved, I would look at the Ultimate Property Strategy, which is a course we've put together on the Property Hub, something I teach at R&B Property, and the course is currently closed on the Property Hub, and we're getting lots and lots of people asking when's it going to be reopened again, but it will be soon. I would look at that. So I know that's kind of frustrating because I'm not giving the answer now, but because it's such a big answer to build out that strategy, I can't answer it quickly here, but what I would say is it does involve BMV property and it does involve capital growth, because that 10 years gives you enough time to take advantage of the growth. If you said, I wanted to achieve this in 3, 4 or 5 years, you might get some growth, but you don't know how much. Whereas if you give it a decade, there might be a wobble, but you know you've got long enough to achieve what you want, even with wobbles. Bear in mind that your goals are realistic and the number doesn't sound too high. Depends where you're starting from, of course, but the number doesn't sound too high. So look out for the Ultimate Property Strategy in a few weeks' months' time, and we'll have that out to the wider world and you can take advantage of it. But definitely the focus for that sort of time frame, I would say, would be around growth and BMV. However, not ignoring cash flow, because cash flow is king, because without it, the whole portfolio will come toppling down.
And this does tie back into strategy, doesn't it? Because I think it's really important to know what it is that you're aiming for, because that will inform the type of property that you buy. So I was talking to someone the other day who is 100% focused on yield. And so he's buying properties which have got a fantastic yield, but they're probably not going to have a great deal of capital growth. If you look in 10 years' time, they're not going to be worth, in real terms, all that much more than they are now. But he knows that, and that's absolutely fine. That's a choice that he's made. Whereas if you were trying to have a bit of everything and you wanted the yield but you also wanted the growth, you probably find yourself disappointed, because it's going to kind of fall somewhere in between and you're not going to end up achieving what you wanted to. So it all comes back into the strategy. Okay, bit of a change of pace now from talking about strategy and coming back to talking about the present day and talking about politics, which is something we've covered far too much on the podcast recently. We cannot win by covering politics, so this will have to come to an end. But Alan asks, with the election of the Conservative Party, what are likely to be the key issues affecting landlords? Well, we were recording the podcast the other week as the results were actually being read out. And so we didn't really know in detail what was going to happen. But we kind of alluded to the fact that at that point, it looked like the Conservatives were doing well. And that was good news for investors broadly. The reason it was good news is, rather than anything good, just an absence of anything bad. So I think what we're probably going to see is a whole lot of not much. And as landlords, not much is pretty much the best you can hope for, because how often do you get an amazing policy that makes everything great for you? Most of the time, it's something coming in which is going to cause more aggravation. So I think had things gone a different way, we would have seen, well, you know what the policies were. And I think we would have seen a lot more regulation and constraints on activity. As it is, I think there's going to be so much going on with regard to Europe and Scotland and all their other priorities, that there's not going to be much appetite to do much that's going to affect landlords. So what are going to be the key issues? I obviously have no idea. I'm not a politician, but I'd say probably not a lot. And that's something to be grateful for.
Yeah, I've got nothing to add to that, Rob. I completely agree. And as you said, we've kind of discussed it a few times already, and we don't want to alienate any more audience by talking politics. But Alan, actually, what Rob said is correct. You know, it's actually what's not going to happen that's more important than what is going to happen. Next, Malcolm. I moved to Australia 10 years ago from the UK, but property here is ridiculously expensive and can only be bought negatively geared. I want to invest in a UK property, but I can't find a way to finance it. I have around about £50,000 as a deposit. Any advice? Yes, Malcolm. Two-prong attack. First of all, speak to HSBC. I have clients in Australia and other places around the world, and the vast majority of the expats I work with use HSBC International. So make that your first port of call. You have to go direct. They won't speak to brokers. So HSBC International, go direct, have a conversation and see if they will lend to you. They will lend, and it depends. I've had people work it around different ways, but between 5 and 10 properties or mortgages to you. So with 50,000, it should be more than enough. So make that your first port of call. Secondly, look at speaking to an international broker. So somebody who has experience with work with expats. Now, if you email in to RMP, hello@rmpproperty.com and ask for an international broker, we'll send you one. No catches. We'll send it on to you. Happy to help. We pass this person on to all the expats we work with. But I would actually, before contacting them, speak to HSBC because they seem the most international investor friendly to expats. So that's my advice, Malcolm.
And while we're talking about this, we might as well plug the magazine again, because in issue 2, there's going to be a feature about exactly that. So make sure you're subscribed to the magazine if you're not already. Okay, another question, another one from Alan, who says, with a plethora of organisations offering tenant referencing services, all apparently very similar and very few displaying typical report format and content, how does one choose, and is there a best buy league? Well, we've looked into a fair number of referencing companies when we were setting up Yellow. We use one called Let Alliance, but we've come into contact with several others and we've seen their reports. They're broadly all very similar, as you've said. So I would say I really wouldn't worry too much about it, because what they do is very similar to each other. The prices are very similar. They're normally around the £20 mark. You'll get some who are a little bit more, a little bit less, but they're all quite similar. So I wouldn't worry too much about which one to use. I would just say use one of them, because to be honest, confession time, back in the days before I saw the light and when I was self-managing, I would sometimes do all the referencing myself. And it makes no sense. It makes no sense to be trying to ring around previous landlords and go through bank statements and all that kind of thing, when for 20 quid, someone else can do it for you. So if it's going to take you more than half an hour to do, which it is, then I'd say it's worth using a company. Doesn't particularly matter which one.
I agree, Rob. There's not really much more I can add to that, because I completely agree with what you said. As long as you go for one of the main ones, they're pretty much as good as each other. I mean, the one we went with for our letting agent, Yellow Lettings, is probably the most comprehensive out there. But all the others out there are pretty good. As long as you're getting the core details, they do the proper checks, then you should be fine. Okay. Next up, Alan again asks, agree with recommendation to use mortgage brokers, but why should someone pay £500 plus broker fees rather than use a broker who covers his or her costs from the fee paid by the lender, as does the paid broker? The reason why, Alan, is you can use someone who doesn't charge fees. But what I find is that the brokers who charge a fee are normally very, very busy and can justify that fee because they're very good. I've not worked with a broker for a long time that is fee-free, and that includes my own mortgages. I still pay that fee because if they can afford to do it for free, chances are they're not that busy. And if they're not that busy, it means they're either very poor at marketing or they're not that good. So it could be one, it could be both, or you could just, maybe the third option, you found this fluky anomaly that is amazing, that doesn't charge. However, I'd say that's probably the most unlikely of the three. Most brokers that I work with charge a fee and are struggling to keep up with the demand, and that's including charging a fee. So it's not that one means that, it's free is better, and equally you can pay a fee and then not be very good. So you do need recommendations. But what I would say is it's a cost worth paying, or an investment even worth paying, if they're very good. And beware, a mum and pop broker who's good with residential mortgages might not be so good when it comes to buy-to-let mortgages.
And I think you're paying for service a lot as well. If someone's only getting paid by the lender, then they're logically going to have to be putting through more applications per week in order to make the same amount of money, which means they'll have less time to spend on your case. So I always use someone who charges. If I was using someone who didn't charge, I'd expect that they'd probably just kind of get everything processed and want to speak to me as little as possible. And that's what you get with some of the really, really big ones. They have a reputation for just kind of looking down the table, going, okay, that's the one for you, processing it, no more questions asked. Whereas if you've got someone who charges a fee, then they can afford to take the time to really get to know your situation. And also it means that if things go wrong during the process, which they do every so often. I've just been tripped up by a bizarre lack of a document, which I wasn't aware of. But because I've got a really good broker, she was able to get onto it straight away and get it fixed. Whereas otherwise, you could just imagine it falling between a couple of different people, it just sitting there for weeks. And before you know it, then the deal could fall apart because all this time has gone by when no one's taking any action. So, like you say, Rob, not saying that you have to pay and that there are no good brokers who don't charge, but as a rule of thumb, for the potential amount of money that we're investing, I think it's a relatively small price to pay.
Agree. So let's move on, Rob. We've got some more questions coming in, and this is live, so we are trying to keep up, but we will. And the next question is, do you plan on including global financial and political movements that you may feel have a significant effect on the UK property market, like Rob B, me, has commented on China previously? I think you do take it into account, and especially we're a global economy now. But actually, I think it fits quite well into the 18-year property cycle because you do have that mid-wobble. And if China does go, it'll be quite close to that mid-wobble time. So I think it actually would slot in to the 18-year property cycle. And that's something we discussed on many previous podcasts. So please go back and listen to that because it's I say a whole podcast, but we've done 2 or 3 on the subject now. But the point being is, halfway through the growth patterns, 7 years modest growth, 7 years aggressive growth, roughly halfway through that part of the cycle, there is a wobble. If China was to go in a year or two, that would be close to that point, so it would tie in. Would the effect of the Chinese market collapsing have effect on the UK? Absolutely, 100%. And more so London than anywhere else, actually, in the UK. Far more so London. But it would affect other areas as well. The Peel Group, which are building a lot or plan to build a lot in Liverpool, a lot of that is backed by Chinese money. So that'll be interesting to see what happens there. But generally speaking, it'd be London that will be hit the hardest certainly when the Chinese market goes. It just depends how hard it goes. That's really what it is. It's not if it does, it's how hard it does. So yes, it will have an effect, but does that mean you should stop investing and not going forward? No, because while it will have an effect, I don't think it will devastate the country. I think it'll have consequences economically, but I don't think it'll devastate us. So it's something to be aware of, and be aware of it, plan around it, but I'd be more worried about our own busts, which will come in due course. But fortunately, I feel that's a while off yet.
Yeah, but I was going to say the same thing. I was going to say long term. Like, am I going to not buy a property now because of something that might happen in China and maybe have an effect next year? No, because I'm investing for the next 10, 20, 30 years. Next question says, do you plan on creating a What's Hot Now page on the website or magazine, which hosts everything from politics to trends? But we're not going to do that in the magazine because it'll be out of date before it's even printed, which is a proper problem that we had, if you notice the election feature in the current magazine. But on the website, we could do what kind of information would be useful to have in there. Let us know. If the data is out there, then we can attempt to pull it together. A lot of the time, it's hard to find the kind of data that we really need. So you can find overall trends for the country and things like that. But it's the local stuff, it's the real nitty-gritty that's hard to find without being there on the ground. And that's the most useful information, but also the hardest to pin down. But if there's anything that you think would be useful, let us know and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, and this links really into the next question as well, Rob, which says, history can tell us a lot, and so can pictures. It would be great to see a resource that mapped history in pictures, so sales prices per region against the 18-year property cycle, etc., in the magazine. And actually, we do have a vital statistics section of the magazine, so that is covered. But actually, it might be a nice idea to get some of this stuff, some of this data, into the Property Hub, a section for data. So it's not going to happen overnight, and we'll have a chat about it, but I think that would be interesting to have that available at people's fingertips. But we do have a vital statistics section in the magazine, and actually in issue 2, and you've got plenty of time to sign up for that, so go to propertyhub.net/magazine. In issue 2, we are covering the 18-year property cycle in more detail than we ever have before. So make sure you subscribe to that if you haven't already.
Yeah, that's going to be big. Just the brief to our writer is probably longer than any article I've seen in print about it before. And that's before we actually get around to putting the content in. So that's going to be a meaty feature. That's going to be well worth paying attention to. Okay, next up, Southeast investments don't seem to return a good level of ROI. What about towns like Folkestone and Eastbourne, where property prices are lower and have good transport links? I can't say I know a great deal about any of those areas. I have been to Eastbourne. It didn't seem to be the most thriving place in the world. Sorry, people of Eastbourne, I'm now going to offend everyone like I did with Burnley before, and Norwich and everyone else I've offended. I think those areas are probably, unless there's a regeneration plan that I'm unaware of, are probably unlikely to have masses of growth. But then you are going to have, if you are getting a yield, then that's fine. But then if you're buying mainly for the yield, then it doesn't really matter if it's in the southeast in particular anyway. So that's kind of a non-answer. But in general, I would say a lot of people who live in the southeast, who live in London, kind of start with what's on their doorstep and then to kind of broaden out based on what they can afford and what their ambitions are. So clearly some of the yields in London are just absolutely not worth bothering with unless you're speculating on capital growth. But that doesn't mean necessarily you just need to keep going till you get to the coast. The rest of the country is there, and there's loads of really fantastic opportunities out there. But I speak from a position of no knowledge about these places at all.
So to add to that, I'd say, in essence, the theory is sound because you're looking at the ripple effect. You're looking at, well, property prices are rising and in London and then rippling out. And then if it's good transport links, they should continue to do well also. There is definitely some, logic in that question. I can see why you would consider it. But as Rob says, there are other areas as well with arguably stronger fundamentals generally. So a while back we were looking at investments in Northampton, for example. Strong transport links into London, but actually a thriving local economy in its own right. It has best of both worlds. And maybe that's what you want to be looking for when you're looking. I class that as tier 2 commuter belt. So you've got tier 1, which is sort of 0 minutes to maybe 40. And then you've got tier 2, which is 40 to 60. Tier 2 is probably where the value is now because Tier 1's already gone up. I've made these tiers up, by the way. There's no official tier system. This is just a Rob Bent's spare of the moment tiering system, which may change from time to time. But for now, I'll stick with it. But those Tier 2 towns and cities, that's what I'm looking at the moment because I feel they offer value. So yes, I can definitely, there's merit in the question and the areas you're looking at, but actually, as Rob said, there are areas that probably have similar transportation times but stronger fundamentals. Okay, and last question. If you want to get your own tenants and avoid high street letting agent fees, what process can you do, and can you do an article on it? We can go better than that. We've actually done a podcast on it. So we'll link to that in the show notes on how about getting your own tenants. But Rob, any quick tips you can offer or advise on now?
I'm really tempted to spill the beans on something else that we're working on at the moment, but I'm not going to do that, although it is linked. As for quick tips, I'd say that basically you can go through a number of companies that can get your property onto the portals. For the most part, if you're looking for kind of mainstream tenants, then getting your property on Rightmove is essential. Doing that will get the phone ringing if the price is right and if the photos are right. Beyond that, there's obviously an art to conducting viewings, but I don't think there's anything in particular I can say about that. But then beyond that, there's a heck of a lot of legalities. So, I'm not going to give you a sales pitch for a letting agent just because we happen to own one, but there is a lot that goes on. And so that's not saying you can't do it. You absolutely can do it. But just focusing on finding the tenants, that really is just the beginning. It's tying up the deposit and the inventory and the safety certificates and all the other things that you might not think of that are a big part of the process as well. So I'd say that that's where a good agent really earns their keep, It's also where a bad agent really falls down, because you do get some agents who are good salespeople. They can actually get a tenant in the first place, but then they are completely disorganized and can't keep everything else in order. But if you do want to find your own tenants, on the strict tenant find part of it, I'd say the key is get it onto the portals at the right price with the right photos. If you do those things and it's in an area where the demand is there, then you probably won't go too far wrong.
I will add to that though, Rob. And again, it's not because we have a letting agent, because we've said this all along, we don't have mortgage brokers, but we recommend you do this as well. Value your time and use experts, because not only by using expert companies or agents or individuals can you save yourself time, but if they do the job well, they can potentially make you more money or save you more money than you would do yourself. So yes, you can go through the hassle and the time drain of getting it done yourself, but trying to save a bit of money on high street fees actually might be the wrong approach. Now, if you get your systems down pat and you become very efficient, then maybe it doesn't take you lots of time. But then again, you've got to go through the time of setting up those systems. So I'm a massive, massive believer in valuing your time. There's nothing I'm not willing to outsource. Got to be careful what I say. I don't do much other than the businesses I run and, look after my family. But other than those two things, there's not much else I do. For any handyman tasks, I use TaskRabbit. I'm not going to get many man points, unfortunately, because when any DIY needs to be done, I go and use TaskRabbit to get it done. So anything like that, outsourcing, value your time, use experts, because they'll probably do a better job and they'll do it a lot faster as well. Okay, that is it. Whew! A lot of questions, Rob. A lot of pressure. A lot of copy and pasting as well. Multitasking for me. Again, not something I'm very good at, but somehow we got through it. So that's the questions, the Q&A section done. But we are not finished, because this would not be a property podcast without a resource of the week. And we have a good, loyal listener, someone who's been around for a long time, Rob. Met him at the Northern Meetup. Really top guy, active in the Property Hub. He's recommended this resource of the week. It's Mark Morris, and it's a cracker.
Yeah, big shout out to Mark Morris. He suggests streetlife.com. Streetlife.com. You'll find the link to this in the show notes. This is basically, I had never heard of this before. It's really weird. I'd never heard of it before. It's basically a very localized social network. So Facebook for your local area would be the quick way of describing it. But I was just amazed because it hadn't been on my radar at all. Then I went on there, created an account and put in my postcode. And there's so much going on there. It seems like everyone in my postcode is on there chatting away except me. How they all knew about it, I don't know, because I pride myself on being an early adopter. But what Mark says is that he's been using this and he's found it useful for a couple of different things. He's got some recommendations for kitchen refurbs from it. So he's gone on there and asked for recommendations for tradespeople. He also said that something you could do using this is if you see a new development or if you see an empty commercial property, you see something that might be an opportunity, you can go on there and ask if anyone locally has any information. So often we'll suggest things and you'll see suggested like, oh, go and talk to people, knock on the neighbours' doors, all that kind of thing. Well, this is kind of virtually knocking on the neighbours' doors and stopping people in the street. So go on to streetlife.com, put in either your postcode or a postcode around where you invest. And I think unless my area is some massive anomaly, I think you'll be surprised about the amount of information that's flying around on there.
I'll check it out. I'll have a look. And I might never need to talk to my neighbours again. So thank you, Mark. Thank you very much for sending that through. And Mark's looking at setting up a meetup in Manchester as well, we'll link to that in the show notes. Make sure you check out the show notes, as we've said already. But we cannot also finish a podcast without, one, telling you what's coming up next week, but two, more importantly, giving our thanks and appreciation to someone who's left us a review. So a huge thank you to Leminky. And Leminky says, a step-by-step guide, great for novices, but also useful for more experienced investors. If you don't know it all, then tune in every week and learn some more. Keep going, Rob and Rob, 5 stars. Well, thank you, Leminky. We very much appreciate it. Okay, Rob, what have we got next week?
Well, we've given it away already. Next week, we've got another listener-driven episode. So with this comes from a listener request. He said he wanted an episode on how to diversify within property. So we hinted at it earlier, but we're going to be going into a lot more detail on that next week.
Yeah, that's a suggestion from Tom, so thank you so much for suggesting that. And if you have any suggestions or ideas for the podcast, there's a thread on the Property Hub that you can leave your ideas and suggestions. You can contact us directly or leave us a SpeakPipe recording. If you go to the website, you'll see leave a recording on the side. Just click on it, talk into your computer. You can re-record it if you mess up. So, don't worry, you don't need an editor. You can take as many goes as you want. Ask us a question. We'll play it live and answer it, as long as you're not telling us off and swearing at us, which hopefully so far no one has done. Thank you, Rob. I think we've survived. If we have lost listeners after this, it's only a handful, thankfully. Our editor will do the rest. But thank you, seriously, thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening. Thank you to everyone who supported the magazine, the book. I know many of you couldn't have made it this evening. And I know many of you have just bought the book, subscribed to the magazine. That's helping out too. So I know we say it a lot, but we really do appreciate your support. So thank you so much. But until episode 115 next week, Rob, that's us, I think. So bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Property Podcast. Make sure you join our mailing list at thepropertypodcast.com.
And remember, we love 5-star reviews. Rob even loves them more than air miles.